Hello everyone! So today I just wanted to talk a little bit about epigenetic traits and introduce the playlist of epigenetic traits that I posted on the classroom. And we might come back to this again when we do our DNA unit, our final unit, because this is really where it belongs. But one of the interesting things that kind of falls into this case of genetic traits that don't follow Mendel's laws is one known as epigenetic traits, and these are traits related to gene expression. So if you think about it, some of your cells are definitely not like the other cells. So for example, skin cells are not heart cells. They're very different. And so part of that is what's called gene expression and the control of gene expression through epigenetics. So this is the cell's way of saying, hey, you're a heart cell. You don't need to grow proteins for making hair. You need to grow proteins for making muscle that you can use as, to repair the muscular proteins, or you need to make muscle proteins, not hair fiber proteins. You're not a skin cell. So there's a system here where the genes, the chromosome, is actually wrapped around something known as a histone. And these are little proteins that the chromosome is wrapped around. And when the histones can be opened and closed essentially, so that the wrapping of the gene around them is more or less. So here you can see a gene right here. That gene is very small, and right now, because of the way the histone is active, it holds that gene tightly inside and does not let the DNA be accessed for its information. Later, if this turns out to be a gene that is necessary for that cell, then a factor, an epigenetic factor, can be attached, and that will open the gene up and allow it for translation and transcription of that gene. Transcription, then translation of that gene. So these are something we'll talk about in the next unit. I might even copy this page over to our next booklet for discussion. But what's interesting is that sometimes these epigenetic factors can actually become permanently attached to the gametes and can be actually transferred down to the next to a child. This allows for a way that the DNA can be modified throughout the life of an individual and then be transferred to their child. And that is unlike any of the other DNA mechanisms we talked about up till this point. So just want to throw that out there. It's really wild and interesting and exciting. There's been lots of studies into things like diet, like if you are eating certain foods, then you might be activating certain epigenetic factors that then get transferred to your child. You can also, if you're exposed to certain, stimulants or drugs and things like that, then those can be those might lead to permanent changes, semi-permanent changes to your DNA that could be sent to your child. And there's a lot of really interesting things. So, there's possibilities of extending it to even like, inherent fears that run through a family of like a fear of spiders or something that might be something that was traumatized into the DNA. That is a kind of on the extreme end of possibilities. It's usually more like there was an example where a group of individuals underwent a famine for quite a few generations, and then the next generation of children, even though the next generation had no famine, when they studied the birth weights of these children, they all came in at below average of a few generations prior. So it seemed like there was an inherent transferred trait of, during a famine, the body wants to use up less energy during a pregnancy and a birth, so the babies are forced to be born at a lower birth weight. But then when the famine was over, the children who suffered through that famine still had children that were in the same sort of weight range, and then that went on for a couple of generations. And so that was one that got kind of transferred down because of the trauma of being in a famine. And who knows what sort of traumas we might be we'll be carrying through. Another famous trait was a bunch of rats that were exposed to a bell. They were exposed to a bell or a stimulant of some sort, a bell or a traumatic experience where every time they heard this bell, they were electrocuted or some sort of negative stimulus. And then those rats were bred, and then and the F1 offspring were not exposed to this bell experiment at all. But then the F2, the rats, the granddaughter rats, were exposed to the bell, and they had increased rate of they had an increased anxiety response beyond what was normally expected for that experiment. So that was a very cool one. This is definitely a growing field. This is one of the reasons I include this slide, is because you might hear more about this. Certainly I see more about this all the time. Once you know to look for it, the study of epigenetics is definitely a growing idea, and I encourage you to go explore some additional videos and things like that about this, and I included a playlist on our classroom as well. That's it for today, and we'll talk to you soon.